If you're among my predominantly male, predominantly older than 25 demographic, there's a decent chance you've never played Dress to Impress, the dress-up game that's particularly big on TikTok right now. And if that's the case, I know what you're thinking. I don't want to hear Cadence here talk about some Gen Alpha schlock for 20 minutes, but you gotta hear me out. Dress to Impress is pretty dang fun, and more importantly, the music is absolutely insane, and strangely has some of the densest music theory analysis of anything I've listened to in the past month. So let's hop into it. As a side note, it's been so hard to get usable background footage because I'm getting absolutely demolished by these children, and my outfits are honestly super embarrassing. Please tell me I ate. So let's take a look at the first tune you hear. In between rounds, you find yourself in the lobby, where you can walk around and see other players, practice your poses, or fail at obby. But if you're like me, you're just absolutely captivated by the music. Let's take a listen. I absolutely love this theme. It's a wonderful example of two of my favorite concepts in music theory. First, we have hybrid chords. In short, hybrid chords consist of two different parts. We have the upper structure, which typically is either a triad, like in this case with our major triads, or sometimes seventh chords. But then underneath, we have a seemingly unrelated bass note. Let's take a look at this first chord, for instance. We have a D-flat major triad over an E-flat bass. This E-flat doesn't appear or otherwise belong in the D-flat major triad or seventh chord, otherwise we would just have an inversion. Similarly, looking at it from the other direction, the D-flat triad doesn't seem to form any easily identifiable chords if we think of E-flat as our root. Without a third over E-flat, like a G or a G-flat in our chord, it's hard to hear this D-flat triad and E-flat bass as just one distinct chord. If we had, say, G minor over E-flat, it's actually hard to really hear the upper structure as an unrelated chord over E-flat, because the entire thing just forms E-flat major 7. I suppose you could technically call our D-flat over E-flat hybrid an E-flat 7 sus4 with a 9 and also no fifth, which is typically how it would function. But I think this demonstrates exactly what hybrid chords are and why I think they're so cool. They're often a nice way to temper these strong chords with a lot of information, simply by stripping away the butter notes and leaving you with these more ambiguous tensions. Take this simple tritone subprogression, for instance. It's fine, but perhaps that E-flat 7 chord is a bit strong and feels a little bit forced. But if we hybridize it, maybe even using that exact same D-flat over E-flat voicing we saw earlier, it might be more palatable while still retaining its function. This, of course, gets into aesthetics, which is more subjective, but at the very least, hybrid chords allow for more ambiguity. And this ambiguity is taken advantage of with these three looping chords. Each of these chords is so enigmatic on its own due to these hybridized voicings. But we also have constant structure. I've actually talked about constant structure in a video from like 4 years ago, so take a look at that if you want to see a more in-depth explanation. But essentially, constant structure is just taking a chord and translating it around to different locations, all while keeping the same structure of the chord, hence the name. We can see how these three chords are exactly the same, but this E-flat over F is a whole step higher than the previous chord, and the F-flat over G-flat is a half step higher. Constant structure typically rips us out of our established tonality because just moving one chord around to different places is so out and non-diatonic. It doesn't sound like it exists within any one key signature. And with both hybrid chords and constant structure, I honestly have no idea what key we're in, if any. It's clear we're in flatland, with all of these flatted notes within our chords and these falling melodic notes. But there's just simply too much ambiguity. We'll come back to this key center stuff in a second, but one thing I really like about this section is that last chord, D-flat minor 7. We can see how we're keeping the same upper structure from the previous line, but now the bass is D-flat, which recontextualizes the upper structure as just the 7th, 3rd, and 5th of D-flat minor 7. It really goes to show how modular things can get when the idea of the upper structure and bass are separated, and we'll explore this concept in one of the later tunes as well. But anyways, let's take a look at the B section. The D flat minor 7 at the end of our A section technically just holds, but it walks down to the B minor 7 and then the A major 7. And since we're now in sharp land, we hear our D flat minor 7 as C sharp minor 7 now, even though they're really the exact same thing. We kind of modulated, I guess, from this flat land key center in the A section to this sharp land A major-ish kind of feeling. And it's so smooth because we used that D flat minor 7 / C sharp minor 7 as our pivot. Other than that, the key center is much less ambiguous here. It's pretty much A major, with all of the chords and notes in this section being diatonic to it. That is until the end of our B section. Check out what happens here. This part is so crazy. That D flat over E flat just appears, which transitions us back to the A section, much like our D flat minor 7 at the end of the A section takes us into the B section. But this chord combined with that piano line on top is just so bright and immediately rips us right out of A major. The following A section is exactly the same harmonically, but now we have this piano playing E flat minor pentatonic over our chords, which adds a bit more crunch. Listen to these chords as vertical slices with the melody note on top. It's just more sauce, and that's pretty cool. This tonal space and feeling is just so unique and so hard to describe, but I think it works really well for this kind of colder, lobby, fashion-y kind of space. And these same ideas continue in the next tune, which plays as soon as the round begins and you're frantically scrambling to put together an outfit that gives marionettes and puppeteers. Oh no. My outfit is so uggo, how did I get second? Okay, well anyways, here's the dress-up theme. This A section is pretty straightforward, with just these constant structure minor 7 chords. I didn't mention it previously, but this kind of constant structure, especially with these minor 7 chords, is a huge harmonic mainstay in house music. And of course, historically, house has been tied to fashion and the runway, so it works perfectly here. Like in the previous tune, because of the constant structure, it's kind of hard to hear any certain key center. Perhaps C sharp, but of course our notes in D flat minor 7 and the following E minor 7 kind of rip us right out of that. We really can't attribute all 4 of these chords to any one key. The bass does kind of walk up the first 4 notes of the C sharp minor scale, so maybe our tonal center could be C sharpish in this section. But I feel like definitely the B section makes us retrospectively feel like this is in G sharp. Let's take a listen. We start this B section kind of just vamping between G sharp minor 7 and C sharp minor 7. This section is entirely diatonic to G sharp minor, with just a standard 1 minor to 4 minor chord progression. Which later goes from 5 minor to 4 minor. The melody also reinforces this tonality with a firmly G sharp minor melody. It's kind of cool because, at least to me, now I hear the A section as just walking up the latter half of the G sharp minor scale. It's another wonderful example of retrospective analysis. Our previous section, of course, isn't entirely diatonic to any one key, and perhaps it doesn't really matter what key we consider it to be in because of that. But I suppose we naturally want to cling to any morsels of tonality we can find, and especially with this strong B section, it makes the entire tune feel kind of G sharp minor-ish. That is, until the very end, when the time is almost up, this last section plays. once again we find ourselves taken right out of the key. This G minor 7 is super efficient in breaking G sharp minor as a key center, simply because most of the notes in G minor 7 aren't found in G sharp minor. And especially with this A minor 7, C7 sus4, and F6 later, it almost feels like we're in this F major-ish kind of place. Or maybe even G Dorian or something. We'll actually come back to this tonality in a second, but definitely the coolest thing about this ending is the rhythm. The entire tune has this slow ramp up in rhythmic complexity, with this style of offbeat syncopated chords superimposed over a more easy to follow, solid 4/4 kind of beat. The chords and bass in the A section are on a 16th note grid, for the most part divided into 3-3-2, 3-3-2. But then the division switches in the B section, now mostly 3-3-4, 3-3. And then in the final part, the syncopation actually crosses over the bar, and we have 3-3-3-3-3-3-3-3-3-3-2 across two measures. And then the ending is just 16 groups of 3, which extends through 3 measures. It's also syncopated and interesting, and what's so fun is that this is all happening over 4 on the floor in the drums. Since the drums outline groups of 4 16th notes with each quarter note kick, these errant groups of 3s in the chords almost desync in this scintillating kind of pattern that miraculously always seems to eventually line up. This is another huge mainstay in house, and honestly a bunch of genres in EDM, which trace these syncopations back to Latin and Afro-Cuban kind of clave-ish rhythms. I find it kind of culturally interesting because I think these otherwise heavily syncopated rhythms, even without the context of the underlying drum groove, almost always feel like 4/4 to me, and probably a lot of other people who listen to EDM, because of the sheer ubiquity of this kind of sound. I will always hear 3+3+2 as 4/4, despite people still bullying me about it in the comments of the time signatures video. But anyways, it's kind of a neat dual purpose with both the constant structure and syncopation. We've already talked about how both of these concepts are super idiomatic to house, which in turn is super idiomatic to fashion. But also, at this point in the game, you're on the clock to put together an outfit that eats, all while being swarmed by 12-year-old pay-to-wins. The more unsettling nature of lacking a key center due to the constant structure in the beginning, plus this long, short kind of rhythm in the chords, just fills one with such a sense of urgency. And the rhythm keeps getting more complex as you run out of time, this pushing ahead feeling matching the dwindling seconds on the clock. And after the tune ends, time is up, and without missing a beat, we go right into the runway section, where you debut your outfit and hit post 28 alongside the aforementioned dress to impress competitive players. All the while, this tune plays underneath. Camera flashes in the beginning are of course very runway-ish, and are probably inspired by Brittany Manson and her song Fashion, the former of which composer BSlick has cited as an influence. For the first time in the soundtrack, we're actually pretty unambiguously in a key center, in this case F minor. The chords are pretty straightforward, and for now only implied through the relationship between the bass and melody notes. One thing I think is kind of cool and probably intentional is how the last tune kind of sets up the new key center in this one. In the dress-up theme, we were mostly in G sharp minor and then moved to F major-ish at the end, which immediately goes into this tune which starts in the parallel minor, which is F minor. Similarly, the dress-up theme's ending almost foreshadows the main rhythm of this tune. At the end of the dress-up theme, we have that 3-3-3-3-3-3-3-3-3-3-2 rhythm, which ends up being the exact division of every 2-measure grouping in the Runway theme, albeit placed in a groove with a light swing. This kind of intro section continues for a second, but then this piano comes in for the B section and everything kind of switches up. section and the variation, which appears a bit later, are probably my favorite parts of the entire soundtrack. It just has so much sauce. The way the piano kind of just lazily sits over these new rhythms with constant structure jumps, it's giving Sonic Mania. It's just so fun. But let's take a closer look at some of those elements. Right out of the more minimal implied chords of the A section, we have these minor 9 chord stacks which form the basis of the constant structure. We start on our 1, F minor 9, still reinforcing our key center, but then we have these intermittent jumps down to D flat minor, which just sounds so cool and unexpected, before quickly jumping back to F minor. I really like how this section takes advantage of the modularity of these upper structure stacks, much like the lobby theme. These next 2 bars seem to mostly repeat, but while the bass goes to D flat like the first time, the upper structure actually moves up to G flat minor 7, before falling back down to F minor 7 as per usual. And this same idea appears in the line below, where the upper structure technically goes to G sharp minor 7, but since the bass is E, we hear the entire stack as E major 7 with a bunch of bright tensions, which then jumps down to E flat minor 9 per our usual constant structure. It's just another great example of how many options you have when separating the bass and upper structure, even in this constant structure environment. Most of the other sections kind of just recapitulate the A section or the B section with additional parts, but I do want to take a look at rhythms in this later section, which is pretty much just the A section, but the piano and synth chords have this cool desyncing effect, where the synth is pushed forward by 1/16th note until it realigns at the end of the bar. Let's take a listen. I think it really pushes this syncopation and cross-measure hemiola to its absolute limit, but it's so hypnotic and captivating over just straight quarter notes in the kick. Really, the only other thing to talk about is just the variation of the B section, which appears directly afterwards. It's the exact same thing underneath, but this new melody is just so good. It sounds so bluesy due to that C flat in the melody, which of course appears on hit as a chord tone of the D flat minor 7. Absolute banger of a tune. And that's pretty much all there is to it. Huge shout out to the composer BSlick for writing a banger soundtrack and answering some questions I had. The soundtrack is out right now on all of the streaming services, so go check it out. I've linked everything in the description. Dress to Impress is a pretty cool game, and unique in the sense that you can learn both jazz theory concepts and fashion at the exact same time. I definitely still need to work on the latter at least.